Hi there! I wanted to make a video about the tier list, especially tier list in Summer Wars. The reason for that is that I like to make tier lists a lot. I find it very fun. And I thought it would be useful to have a video on the channel talking about how I use tier list and what I mean with each tier, because tier lists are a form of communication, a way for people, for me, to tell other players how strong or weak something is, and they generate fun discussions, in my opinion. And it's part of the fun of playing asymmetric strategic games. And yeah, and also that's why I wanted to do it. And here I go. The way I use tier list mostly is, I think how most people use tier list, in the sense that they all start with the tier A, which tier A is like the balance power, where we see how powerful a card should be. We mostly will put that card in A tier. I do something that might be a little annoying, a little confusing with A tier, which is divided in 3 tiers. The reason I do this is because the tier A is the most important tier, and also most cards and most factions end in this tier because designers tend to try to make the game as balanced as possible, and thus most factions and cards end here. So because I wanted to talk a little more about this very important tier, I like to have the A+ and A- subtier. But don't be confused. This is just A+, A, and A- are just 3 subtiers that conform the biggest tier, which is A tier, which is the balanced tier. So what I mean when I put in a neutral tier is because I think this card is perfectly balanced, or almost as perfect as it's reasonable to expect. Yeah, I think I wouldn't buff it, I wouldn't nerf it. It's just as how I think it should be, and the same goes for a faction. When I put a card in A+, it's a way for me to communicate in general. Not only, maybe it's that the card is a little stronger than average, but in general I use it to express that I'm not super confident about this card, and that it's balanced, and it might be secretly a little too strong. And that's how I will call a card that it's an A+ tier. A card that I think is balanced, but I could be easily convinced that I'm wrong and it's actually an S. And the opposite goes for M- tier. It's a card that I think is balanced, but I could be easily convinced that it's a B tier. So going with that, what's a B tier card for me? A B tier card for me is a card that is a little weak. With that said, don't be confused. It doesn't mean that the card is not useful. The card, it might be very useful, maybe a core card in a deck. It just means that I think it will welcome a little more to be balanced. I think sometimes maybe the ceiling is not as high as I expect, or it's not as versatile. But yeah, sure, decks will use B tier cards quite a bit in their plans, and often be an essential part of the deck. But I will think they need a little more. For faction, it can even be like, I'm using these numbers kind of how much win rate will have a faction in those places, but this is just a general idea that they're not like, it's not a perfect rule. And yeah, this is kind of what I expect a B tier faction. Maybe 41 is a little too low, but it's perfectly reasonable to pick for a B tier for a tournament, for example. Maybe it's a faction that you feel more comfortable with. Maybe it's a faction that maybe it's a B tier because it has some weak matchups, but actually for the matchups you expect to find, it's actually extremely good. So yeah, that's kind of what I mean with B tier. With C tier, it's just a card that's weak. And generally it's weak enough that most people agree it's not balanced. But still, cards that have used it. You're still going to use this card during games, but yeah. It's going to be a little harder than a B tier card to use. It's going to have a harder time find a good use. Often you're fine just discarding it. You're saying, yeah, this is, but in a pinch or in the right situation, maybe you're happy to have that card, and that's what a weak C tier card is. For D, however, we enter in the territory of the very weak cards. Cards that, yes, I in general you don't want to use. You just throw them away. And some people often will see these cards and tell me, yes, I have used this card to win a match, a game, maybe the final of a tournament. And yeah, that will happen. Maybe you won in 50 games, won in 100 games, I don't know. It will happen because the card does something, it's relevant. But most of the time, it's not a car you want to have. You prefer to have another car, and yeah, it just have a very hard time performing well, but they still have some uses. And 4F will be what some people think I'm saying when I say something is very weak, and that's just almost useless or useless card. This is a card that you just might have a blank text, and it's basically the same. You won't use it. I don't think right now in Summer Wars there is a faction that's an F, like super weak, that wins only less than 1 in 4 games. Or I think there is a card in an F. There are 1 or 2 cards that we can discuss, and you will convince me they're F, and I'm going to discuss about them when the proper card comes out in future tier list. But for the most part, I think it's a top 2 cards an F, and probably only 1. Maybe even 0. I don't know. That's a good thing, obviously. And going for the other side is basically the same reversed. With that said, I'm going to say that for reasons that are very long to explain and are not relevant to this video or that relevant, it's rare for games to have many units on the higher tiers, and that's kind of to assume because overpowered cards tend to gravitate the power towards them. So they tend to be easily banned or just force the power of the game towards them. So it's generally you have several cards B or below, but it's rare to have several cards S or plus in games in general, not only Summer Wars. And it obviously applies to Summer Wars. But I will say this is the reverse of this line. S's are a little OP cards. They're cards that are a little OP, they feel a little too versatile, a little too strong, a little too high ceiling, but they're not oppressive. People generally don't complain when they see these cards in play. They don't say, oh yeah, it's very frustrating. They feel they're too good, but they're not winning games. And that's the difference with SS tier super strong cards, that they feel you just enter into oppressive territory. You're just like, this is too much. It's very annoying to play against that because it feels so much value playing those cards. Yeah, lucky again, we don't have many cards on that, and a few cards that we could say are here are very kind of justified to be there. So yeah, that's all for SS, and SSS are cards that are short. This is just extremely OP cards, super oppressive. I'm going to say right now there are 0 cards that I think belong here in Summer Wars, which is a great thing. It's not common in games to have this because things that are in SS tend to be banned, and people tend in design tend to detect this. But there are games, very popular games that have characters or cards with this power level. It's not the case of Summer Wars. I just added this tier here for completionism. And it goes without saying that the same goes for G. G would be cards that just win the game basically when you play them, or they're just on the further territory, they're just broken. Or faction that just completely dominate. We have nothing like that in Summer Wars, but I just put it here right now just for completionism. That's it. That's all I had to say about tier list. I hope this video is useful just to have the channel around for when someone asks, oh, what do you mean with this? I don't know, S tier. Well, that's what I kind of mean. Obviously, you're going to have a better idea if you see several of my tier lists and see what cards I put there and what I think about those cards. But yeah, I think that's all for this video.